The other day, Anthropic released this model context protocol, and it's pretty interesting. It's basically to connect LLM applications with your data, so you can integrate both together. And we're gonna do an integration with Tinybird to analyze data you already have in Tinybird. Okay. The architecture is very simple. We're not gonna focus on the internals of this protocol, but instead we're gonna go hands-on mode and we're gonna build something. But the thing is, there is Claude Desktop, which is the chatbot LLM application, desktop application from Anthropic. They have already implemented a client of this protocol, and we're going to implement the server side. Okay, so when we ask stuff to Claude, it can get information from the data you have in Tinybird to ask your questions. Okay. So we're going to talk about 3 core concepts which are already implemented in the Claude desktop client, which are resources, prompts, and tools. We'll see in a few minutes. And this is more or less the general architecture. Okay, so basically Claude is the MCP host in this case. It implements a client and it communicates with a protocol to different servers. We're going to build a Tinybird model context protocol server, which is gonna take information from a Tinybird workspace using the REST APIs of Tinybird. This is remote, it's not local to your computer. And thanks to the protocol, we're gonna feed the host, in this case, Claude, okay? One interesting thing is this GitHub repository that they've published, in which there are plenty of examples of servers. So there are servers to connect to GitHub, to PostgreSQL, for web scraping, for search the web. And there is an interesting one, which is the one I've used to build a Tinybird server, which is hidden right here. It's the SQLite one, which basically allows to integrate with a local SQLite database. And we're going to do more or less the same, but with Tinybird API. So let's start with implementation. So I'm going to take the quick start. I already have Python. I already have UV installed. Let's start a new project. Let's call it Tinybird MCP. So this is important. It asks to install the server in my Claude app I have in my computer. I'm gonna say yes. Now we have a Tinybird MCP folder. I'm gonna activate the Python virtual environment and I'm going to open Visual Studio. So this is my Claude desktop settings file. And as you can see, we have here added the new server we just created, okay? It's now local to my computer. And if I restart Claude, let me check. because I have to install UFSync. Okay. And I think there is some minor bug. Let me check. TinyBird MCP. Yes. This is not right. This is a bug they have right now. I'm going to restart. And now we have this plug in here, in which we have the installed MCP servers. We now have one, the one I've created locally. And we'll go into this later on. But we have some tools provided by this server, and here some prompts provided by this server. Okay. Right now, since we created the project from a template, what we have is a template project, which it's kind of a node management app. Okay. So I'm not gonna use it, but the important thing you need to know, because we are in build mode, is the structure of the server. Okay, this is kind of an SDK, kind of a framework, and you have to fill the gaps to make your server work. Okay, so we have, I'm going to start by the end. We have your main function that starts the server and makes the communication with the client and so on. And then you have a list of tools provided by this server. In this case, there is a tool to add a new node in memory. This list of tools are the ones listed here. Okay, add node, okay. And then whenever the client, the MCP client in this case, the one implemented in Claude Desktop, decides it needs to use this tool based on the prompt, then calls this method with the name of the tool it's trying to use and a set of arguments. For instance, in the case of adding a new node, which is this tool we have, it requests the add node tool with a set of arguments, which in this case is the name of the node and the content of the node. Okay, and you just can save it locally, in this case in memory, and report back to the client that the node was added. Second concept, we have prompts. So prompts are shown in this menu of here, and they're basically to ease the use of the server. So in this case, this server is adding nodes in memory, and you have a prompt to summarize all the nodes you've been adding during the session. Okay. And the implementation in this case is very simple. It just returns a prompt result with name and content of all the nodes in memory. Okay. So whenever you add a node, let's give it a try. Okay. Add a node with name test and content. I'm a test node. So now the client is connecting to our server. Okay, this is the input of the tool and the tool it's going to use. They add a new node one. We allow for this chat. And we just added a new node. Okay. So if I now use the summarize nodes prompt, for instance, Summarize notes, style, plain text. I don't know. There isn't too much to summarize. So let's say I've been adding notes and this prompt will print everything, okay? So this is more or less how a client and a server communicate. These are the two main concepts, okay? Tools and prompts. And there is a third one, which are the resources, okay? Same way, a resource is identified by a URI. In this case, we have a URI per node. And in the same way, you can, from the client, you can request resources created in the server. Okay, so it's a way of providing like artifacts or more context from the server to the client. Okay, and that's it. So we're gonna change this template, let's say, and we're gonna build tools to integrate or interact with TinyBird APIs. We're gonna build a prompt to do a very specific use case for data analytics, and we're gonna build a resource to have kind of a report of the whole chat we're gonna do with Claude. And I have here some sample project I created before. So I'm not gonna code directly, but I'm gonna copy and paste stuff from one project to the other, okay? So we can see how this works. So first thing I have here, it's just a TinyBird API client, which is configured with an API URL and a token. And it can do things like list the available data sources from the token workspace, get information about specific data source, important to know the schema, list pipe endpoints, get the information about the specific pipe, including the SQL, it's important, and then request data, okay? Given a pipe name, it can request data, or it can run arbitrary queries, okay? Then we have some interesting thing. We have another tool for the MCP client in case it needs to get information from our documentation. We have here a list of resources. And that's pretty much it, okay? These are the functions. Let's go back to the diagram, this one. So we're gonna have our TinyBird workspace, and these web APIs we're gonna request are implemented in this client, okay? This API client. Now, let's implement the different tools we're gonna provide to our server is going to provide to Claude. Let me check. And I'm going to copy this function. And before that, I'm going to initialize the client like this. Let me go here. We're gonna remove the login, we don't need it. We're gonna import OS and from .env import load.env, and we're gonna initialize the API client here. Server. Where is the server? Here. Okay. And we're going to import the API client. So let's go to the list of tools that this server is going to provide. So we have a tool with name list data sources. Another one to get details of a data source, which requires the ID of the data source as an argument. Then another tool to list all the pipes in the workspace. Another tool to get the information of a pipe, which requires the pipe ID. A tool to get data from a pipe endpoint, which requires the pipe ID and a number of parameters. Depending on the pipe, it has some parameters. And a tool to run a select query, and this other one to get the TinyBird docs. And this is to build our resource, okay? We will come back to this later. So these are the basic tools we're gonna provide. Now, this is just the, let's say, the discovery of the available tools. Now we have to do the implementation. And we have it here. I'm going to copy and paste again. It's pretty simple indeed. The implementation as well. So let's go here. So whenever the client, in this case Claude, tries to use a tool, it's going to provide the name of the tool and the arguments that the tool requires. Okay, the arguments are defined in the signature of the tool. So when the client wants to list data source, we use our API client and list the data sources. Okay, since the API client is configured to a TinyBird API URL and a workspace admin token, it can communicate, okay? And it returns a plain text response, okay? Doesn't matter. Same for getting details of a data source. We call our API via the API client, and Claude will send as arguments the ID of the data source it wants to get information about. So we get it from the arguments dictionary. Same for listing pipes. Same for getting information of a pipe. Now, for requesting the data from a pipe, we use another method. We need the pipe ID and a list of parameters. We assume that Claude, since Claude is able to get the information of a pipe, it knows the parameters that requires to be used. So we expect to receive a params dictionary with whatever parameters the pipe requires, okay, to respond with an answer. Same for running a select query, and the one for listing the LLMs. We will go with this later on because this has to do with resources, okay? So these are our tools implementations. Next thing. The prompt. So for the prompts, same thing. We need to provide a list of prompts so they can be shown in Claude. And then whenever the user chooses a prompt, how to make it work, okay? So in this case, I've done something a little bit more sophisticated. I'm going to copy this but it's pretty interesting. I'm going to explain you. Handle list prompts. Okay. So, one thing that I think it's very interesting for when building a server is being able to dynamically configure the integrations or the prompts. So since we have the capability to connect to a TinyBear workspace, why not we save the available prompts for this specific server in a TinyBear data source? So this is what I'm doing here. Let me show you. For instance, this is the workspace I'm going to be analyzing with Claude. And what I've done is creating a prompts data source that have a name, a description, a timestamp, the arguments that requires to work, and the prompt to be passed to Claude to start the conversation. Okay, if you look at the prompt, it's super long. Okay, it gives a lot of context of the kind of thing we want to analyze. Okay, we'll go into detail later on. Okay, so so basically, when listing prompts, we do two different things. We get the prompts from that data source in our workspace, and additionally we add a prompt template, which is like the default one, okay, for doing a demo. So when using the server, by default you have the default prompt template, which is a demonstration, and if you want to provide more prompts for whoever is using this server, they can add it, or you can add it to the prompts workspace, okay, just by appending a new row with the columns we mentioned. I'm going to remove all login. So for the list of prompts, we do that. We get the prompts from TinyBear plus the default one, and we just create a list of prompts as required by the protocol, by the SDK in this case, and that's it, okay? So the client can list the available prompts. I'm going to get the default one. We will talk later about it because it's pretty interesting how it's written. Okay, so this is the default prompt, and that's it. Now, now we need to handle when the user selects a prompt in the Claude interface, what is going to happen, okay? Again, I'm going to handle get prompt. I'm going to get it from here. This is very simple. This is basically copy and paste because it's very similar for any server. Okay, so when the client or the user requests a prompt, we need to respond with a get prompt result. Okay, so in this case, what we do is we always get the list of prompts from the TinyBear workspace in case there is a new one, and we build a response basically by sending to the client, to Claude, the whole text of the prompt, okay, so it can start the conversation. So for the case of the default one, we are just sending this whole thing, okay, to start the conversation. prompts have arguments. Okay, arguments are passed in the UI and they are replaced in the prompt. Okay, very simple. And there is one thing we're missing, which are the resources. Okay, the resources is, we mentioned before, for the case of nodes, they were the nodes themselves. For the case of the use case we are building, is going to be a report of the analytics that we are building with Claude, okay, and Tinybird. So, handle list resources. So in this case, we're going to have a single resource, which is Tinybird Insights, which contains kind of a plain text document with metrics, insights discovered by Claude when talking to Tinybird. And then when the user asks for a resource, we just return the list of insights that the client has been gathering, okay? Anytime the client responds a question from us, it builds an insight and it sends it to the server, okay? Because we have this tool, so the client knows it can use this tool to send to the server some insight it has discovered in the data, okay? We will see in a few seconds. So, and whenever the client calls this tool, what we do is to append that information, which is plain text, into a list of insights we have in our client, and we update the MCP client with the resource. So the resource is kind of a way of communicating a state between the client and the server, okay? And the output in the end is an artifact in this case. In this case, it's a plain text artifact. So we are appending insights into this list, and to build the resource, we just create a text document with the things that the client has discovered from the data, okay? And I think that's pretty much it. We have everything we needed. We're gonna go a little bit through the prompt template, the default one, just to understand how it's built. And I think we don't need anything else. Okay. So the prompt, it's like building a predefined use case or predefined context to use so the client can use the server. Okay. So in this case, we are telling what is Tinybird, okay, because this server is to integrate with data you have in a Tinybird workspace. So we're telling what is Tinybird. We are telling the LLM, in this case Claude, what is its goal. So its goal is to get insights from a Tinybird workspace, and it has to interact with the Tinybird workspace and so on. Then we explain how the server is being used. We say there is a user that it's selecting some option in the Claude MCP menu, etc., and has chosen an integration, which is this specific prompt. Okay, this text file is that prompt, and it has to follow some instructions. Okay, so the user chooses a topic, for instance. We can say, when choosing the prompt, we can say analyze web analytics metrics or web analytics performance or whatever, okay? and okay, here it is. And we tell how the server, which are the components of the server. Okay, the components. So we have prompts in the server, which is this thing. We have resources, which is what I've mentioned before. It's kind of a living document to store the insights from the conversation. And there is tools, okay? This server provides several tools to interact with the TinyBird APIs, the ones we mentioned before. So we're telling the LLM what tools, prompts, and resources are in the server, okay? Then we can add more specific context, like for example, TinyBird is built on top of ClickHouse. So whenever you have to write an SQL, use the ClickHouse syntax, and we could add more context. And finally, we're gonna tell what we want to get from this use case, let's say. So we're gonna suppose that we want to analyze a business scenario and create a narrative that involves a data-driven business problem, blah, blah, blah. It's not super important now because in the end, the use case we're gonna showcase is go to the TinyBird workspace and tell me what insights you can extract from the topic I've given to you, okay? There is a set of steps. So once we have chosen the topic, create like a problem narrative, go and inspect the data, ask for some input to know what the user needs to know, run some queries, generate some dashboards, and build a final report, okay? So this is very comprehensive, let's say. It's just an example. So that's what I think it's important to have, like a separate prompts storage, so you can customize in some way the server to serve different use cases. Of course, you can always write the whole thing in the chat, no, in Claude. But if you have here several use cases predefined, pues don't. It's very useful, let's say. So we've made a lot of changes in the server. It's pretty much complete. Let's restart. No. Oh, yes. Okay, so look at what we have. So I'm going to open Claude. And now we have, look first here, available MCP tools. We have the tools we've built to connect to the TinyBird workspace, and integrations. We have the TinyBird demo, which is the prompt we mentioned before, the default one. Okay, it's called TinyBird demo, and we saved another one in the workspace, which was called TinyBird dev, and we have it here. So let's start with this. For instance, web analytics metrics. So the workspace is about analytics from the TinyBird website. Okay, so we have this table with a timestamp, session ID, type of action, and some payload information interested for extracting analytics. We have a bunch of pipes, but basically we have, this is the main table, and we have several materialized views to extract some metrics. So we are not telling Claude anything else. We're just telling, okay, following the prompt, this prompt we've mentioned before, this is the topic we want to analyze. So let's start. Okay, so since we told them that it started with a narrative, so it's talking about we are some person that needs to report to the board in a board meeting, etc., etc. And it's inspecting the workspace we provided. Okay, remember we have a .env file with the tinybird admin token. Okay, so it got some information and it said, okay, it seems there is some event data tracking, session level data, blah blah blah, and it proposes several ways to extract insights. Okay, so let's go with the first one. I'm not gonna complete everything, just the first one. So overall metrics, website performance, and it's going to use the request pipe data tool. So it's gonna get data from Tinybird, and once it has got some data, it's sending insights to the server. Remember we had the append insight tool, append insight tool, so the client can send us insights. We save them in memory and we can build a final report. Okay, so it's gonna show us some dashboard, pretty generic, but it helps us to understand some stuff: daily active users, page views, bounce rate, session duration, etc. And we're gonna say finish the memo. So once you finish the memo, it builds the report, final business insights memo, blah blah blah. And this is like the resource the server is building based on the insights, okay, from the conversation we had. And we can get it from here, from business insights from Tinybird. Okay, and this is the final analysis. So this is a way in which we have built from scratch an MCP server. It integrates with Claude, it connects with a Tinybird workspace, and it allows for contextualized cloud with actual analytical data. Okay, that's it. Hope you liked it.